Let's try again. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our first webinar in our 10-part series focused on CNU's Highways to Boulevards initiative. This inaugural webinar, Highways to Boulevards, Spearheading a Successful Campaign, is meant to acquaint a broader audience of advocates with best practices, effective messaging, outreach, and advocacy tactics that make up a winning freeway removal effort. So this webinar is made possible by a generous grant from the Ford Foundation, who've been immeasurably supportive of CNU's project for transportation reform. If you don't know, the Congress of New Urbanism is a leading organization in promoting walkable mixed-use neighborhood development, sustainable communities, and healthier living conditions. If you're not a member of CNU, please visit cnu.org/join to learn about our membership levels and benefits. While you're there, freely peruse the site to stay current on the latest news and CNU initiatives, including Highways to Boulevards. If you have any questions today during today's presentation, please use the chat feature at the bottom right of the corner of the browser. We'll have a Q&A session near the end of this hour, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can. So today, many of you are joining us because there's a freeway in your city that cuts through the city, eroding the quality of life for city residents and the surrounding built environment. We are joined by two advocates today making incredible progress removing urban freeways in their communities. Stephen Nutter, who is an advocacy community member at Livable Streets, and Dave Powell, who is coordinator at the Southern Bronx River Watershed Alliance. Today, they will present their work in Boston and New York, respectively, illuminating the mechanics of freeway removal campaigns in action. We're actually joined today by John Norquist, who's going to give a few minutes, tell you a little bit about his efforts in Milwaukee, removing the Park East freeway.
Thank you, Alex. Removing a freeway is a difficult thing because it seems so counterintuitive. Usually people think about traffic when they're driving a car, they just want to go as fast as possible, and it seems almost miraculous, particularly like at 2 in the morning. You can drive through a city at 70 miles an hour if you don't get a ticket. Why would anybody want to disrupt that? But there's a problem, and the problem is that in cities, streets have more purpose than just moving traffic. They're a setting for retail sales. They're a social setting that's valuable to neighborhoods around the road. And so typically throughout human history, streets in the urban context are built to serve more purposes than just moving vehicles. And so you have great streets like Fifth Avenue in New York, Newberry or Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, Market Street in San Francisco, all these places. And you have a network of streets that work together to distribute traffic in the city and to allow people to walk and bike and all the other things that they do. And so you need to put a plug in this thing. So what we are trying to do is to restore in the United States the basic multiple purposes of streets in cities. And in Milwaukee, we removed the Park East Freeway and replaced it with McKinley Boulevard, which is actually an avenue. And the people of the city are happy with it. Nobody wants to put the freeway back. A lot of people wanted to save it when the issue was up, just like in San Francisco with the Embarcadero or the Central Artery. There were referenda that were held and people voted not to tear down the freeway. Then later on in California, they have several referenda on every issue. They voted to do it. And so, but one thing you can say about every single place this has been done, the West Side Highway in New York, which is now West Street, in Portland, the riverfront freeway ramp that separated the downtown from the Willamette River, San Francisco, Milwaukee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, every place where this has been done, including around the world in places like Seoul, South Korea, nobody wants to go back to the way it was. the traffic problems that were forecast didn't develop, and the neighborhoods all got better. So anyway, I'm so glad that we have the two speakers with us today. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Alex McCaig to just serve as a moderator so we can hear those two examples and all the progress that they've been making and the challenges that they still face. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. And with that, we are going to turn it over now to Dave Powell, who's going to talk to us about his efforts in New York.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Is the audio coming through okay? Alex, I'm not seeing our, yes, I am. There it is. Okay, thank you. Just adjusting. So first and foremost, thank you to John and everyone at CNU for allowing us to share our campaign with those of you who are like-minded in North America. And we really do look forward to continuing this dialogue with you all after the webinar and sharing resources and sharing ideas. So let's continue that into the future. My name is Dave Powell. I'm the coordinator of the Southern Bronx River Watershed Alliance here in Bronx, New York. And just by way of context, the title slide you're looking at here is the Bronx River in the background. In front of that is Concrete Plant Park, a waterfront park hard fought for by one of our member groups, Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice, an Amtrak rail line, and then the Sheridan Expressway. And the Sheridan, unlike the rail line, the Sheridan blocks access to the river for most of the river's existence throughout the South Bronx. And transforming the Sheridan has been really the focus of our campaign for the last 15 years. And I'm going to walk you through that campaign. But first, a little bit about the Alliance. We are a coalition of 5 Bronx-based environmental justice groups, 1 citywide organization, and 1 regional organization. The 5 Bronx groups are geographically located in the neighborhoods that are most deeply impacted by the Sheridan Expressway, and the other 2 groups serve as kind of our technical assistant providers, if you will. And these are some of the outcomes that we pursue in our work, but by way of shorthand, I think the most important thing to note is that we are deeply rooted in the local environmental justice movement, which has a long and deep history in the South Bronx. Community organizing is a very big part of what we do. And we, as throughout the country, are rooted in the principles of the environmental justice movement, which hold that local people who are most directly being affected by noxious land uses and punishing highway infrastructure are really local experts and have expertise that need to be brought to the table when crafting solutions and mitigations for these problems. We're of course also aware that our work comes in the context of a larger national movement for environmental justice and a larger national movement for smart growth and the reclamation and repurposing of highway infrastructure that has served its purpose or in many cases didn't serve its purpose, but is at this point quite obviously obsolete and needing to be transformed. So a little context of the South Bronx. You're looking at a map of New York City, just to give you an idea of where the Bronx is situated broadly. The South Bronx neighborhoods that we are part of are about half geographically of the poorest urban congressional district in the United States. This slide in particular is highlighting some of the land uses and facilities that are in one of the neighborhoods where we're based, and that's Hunts Point in the South Bronx. And Hunts Point is a peninsula, and it hosts the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center, which receives and sends out 15,000 diesel truck trips every single day. and it's in fact, the largest food distribution center in the nation. Here we have a map of the South Bronx with the Sheridan Expressway highlighted in red. The Sheridan is also known as I-895. It is only 1.25 miles long, so it's just a stub of a highway, really. You can really get a sense, I think, from looking at this map, just how surrounded the South Bronx is by highway infrastructure. And despite the fact that we have the aforementioned 15,000 diesel trucks coming and going from the Hunts Point Peninsula, and in particular into the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center, which you see here in yellow, there is no direct link from any of the highways into the peninsula or into the food distribution center. So not only do residents have to deal with local streets on the highways, residents have to deal with trucks on highways, they also have to deal with diesel trucks on local streets, many of which are traveling over a mile to get to their destination. So it's kind of a double fail, if you will, because not only is the highway infrastructure resulting in trucks on local streets that are punishing the health of residents, but it also doesn't serve the industry either. So that is the reason why we're trying to transform it. And for this reason, not surprisingly, the siting of so many noxious land uses and so much dysfunctional highway network has a toll on the health of local residents. The South Bronx has some of the highest asthma rates in the country, and in Hunts Point in particular, 1 in 3 children suffers from asthma. So how did we end up with such an unhealthy and unsafe and dysfunctional transportation network? Well, the Sheridan is a latter-day Robert Moses highway. It was built in the 1960s. Originally, Moses planned to plow the highway right through the Bronx Zoo and the Bronx Botanic Gardens and into Westchester County, but he was stopped by wealthier constituencies. And the Food Distribution Center was not constructed into the 1970s. So it was never, the whole highway network was never conceived to serve what is now the economic hub of the South Bronx that has regional significance. Another thing to note about the Sheridan Expressway is that ridership is relatively low. Here you see the numbers relative to the Cross Bronx Expressway. It's about 1/4 of the ridership of the Cross Bronx and about 1/3 of the Bruckner. Ridership is so low, in fact, that you can do this on it. This is a slide that shows the members of the Alliance actually sitting and standing on the Sheridan Expressway during rush hour. In 2000, we did that, and we made the New York Post, which wrote an article lambasting the state's plans to expand the roadway. And we did it again in 2009. It's something we do from time to time to make the case for the transformation of the roadway. So in 2006, the Alliance hosted a series of neighborhood charrettes and visioning sessions to kind of flesh out community priorities and work on distinct elements for the footprint of the Sheridan Expressway, to envision how the transportation network could work better and what we would do with the land in the Sheridan Expressway's footprint. We came up with a vision that was dubbed the Community Plan, and I'm now going to present to you some of those priorities and some of those elements. A definite priority was and is, as aforementioned, the removal of commercial traffic from local streets, both to alleviate dangers to pedestrians and to improve respiratory health in our area. In this slide, you see 2 major intersections, which are both next to subway stations. On the left is Hunts Point Avenue at Bruckner Boulevard, and on the right is Westchester Avenue at Whitlock. Both of these have Sheridan on or exit ramps that pour traffic into these intersections. And in the case of Westchester and Whitlock, we also have the entrance to 2 of our waterfront parks. So it's very difficult for people who want to access these parks because they're contending, in the case of Westchester and Whitlock, 2 Sheridan off-ramps that are pouring traffic onto a local intersection that abuts the entrance to 2 different parks. we found that, or we saw that creating direct ramp access to the Hunts Point Peninsula from Bruckner Boulevard was the most crucial step to facilitating the removal of this traffic from local streets. The access envisioned in the community plan was and is a four-way flyover access directly from the Bruckner, touching down on Oak Point Avenue, which is in the height of the industrial corridor in Hunts Point. And that's crucial because, you know, this is a mixed-use neighborhood. There is a residential section and there is a industrial section, and the highway infrastructure runs, as it's currently configured, runs diesel trucks through the residential neighborhood. So this would be a drastic change to that. With the expressway removed, residents envisioned a tap facilities and several more acres of parks and greenway to run along the river. And here you can see some conceptual images that speak to that vision. Again, and without the Sheridan in the way, residents envisioned the opportunity to improve pedestrian and bicycle byways and to fix really kind of off geometrics to certain intersections. The conceptual image here is showing the intersection at Hunts Point Avenue and Bruckner Boulevard. In the foreground, the little triangular plaza is the Hunts Point Avenue subway station. And once again, without the roadway, we envision streets being extended to provide direct access to our waterfront parks and to the Bronx River itself. The conceptual image shows the detail of how residents envisioned connecting 3 streets in particular from the West Farms neighborhood to the Bronx River and to Starlight Park. And the photos show you what that access or lack of access looks like today. The top photo is looking from West Farms, and the bottom photo is from inside Starlight Park with the Sheridan to the right. So in 2010, with encouragement from the Alliance and support from our Congressman, Jose E. Serrano, the City of New York applied for and received a $1.5 million Tiger grant to study the transformation of the roadway, including the possible removal of the roadway. We were very excited that the community plan would get a rigorous technical airing and that the resultant recommendations would be a blueprint for how to transform the roadway moving forward. The study area is indicated in bright white on that slide. But in 2012, the city shocked us by announcing that they were removing the removal option, as it were, from the scope of the study. The level of analysis they offered us was quite shallow, and we didn't accept it. And we reacted to that with protest, and we had a few very, very cold months with the city study team. The photo that you're looking at shows young people from the Alliance having walked out of a stakeholder meeting that the city called right around this time and participating in a press conference in front of the stakeholder meeting. Eventually, we did resume dialogue with the city, but we maintained public pressure on them as a means of influencing the study recommendations. And that strategy was actually largely successful. In June of this year, the city released a suite of recommendations that largely builds on the Alliance's agenda. It did stop short of full removal of the expressway, but it does speak to many of the goals and will, we believe, achieve many of the goals that we have if implemented. So some of the city's key recommendations, and you'll recognize some of these, were construction of direct access ramps from the Bruckner Expressway into Hunts Point. These are now all the city's renderings that you're going to be looking at. Closure of the Sheridan entrance ramp at Hunts Point Avenue, indicated here in orange, and closure of the southbound exit ramp at Whitlock and Westchester, indicated here by the red arrow. Again, these are the two most dangerous intersections. Hunts Point Avenue is a fatal intersection. We have fatalities at that intersection every year. A partial conversion of the Sheridan into a boulevard with traffic lights at 3 intersections, which will connect the West Farms neighborhood, East Tremont neighborhood, and Claremont neighborhood with Starlight Park and with the river. You're looking at a conceptual drawing done by the city on the left, and on the right, a map of that shows the new intersections, the proposed intersections with traffic lights at East 173rd, East 172nd, and Jennings Avenue. And Jennings Avenue hosts several schools, an elementary school and a high school. So those students would now have access, if implemented, those students would have access to the river and a park that a highway is currently blocking them from. And last but not least, the city proposed a shrinking of the Sheridan roadbed, which would allow for developable land and potentially affordable housing, economic development, more green space, and an expanded greenway. So we're very excited that the city has embraced so much of our agenda, but as those of you who have worked on these issues and campaigns know, recommendations are not implementations. The next step is to get the State Department of Transportation to calendar an EIS, and to get our governor and state government generally, but in particular the governor, to recognize this as a priority, not just for the South Bronx, but actually for the region and for the state. So to that end, over the next year, we'll be expanding our community organizing efforts and strengthening our relationships with area businesses and organized labor to bring the message to the state that the time is now to transform the South Bronx. And if you would like to stay in touch, my contact information is here. Thank you very much. I don't know, are we doing a Q&A at the very end, Alex and Tim, or is Stephen going to go next?
Yes, we're going to do the Q&A at the end. So thank you very much, Dave. It was great. It was wonderful. So now we are going to turn it over to Stephen Nutter from Livable Streets. He's going to present his work that he's been doing in Boston. Stephen.
Hello, everyone. I guess you should be able to hear me now. Is everything good? And I'll just, I guess the next slide is, there we go. All right. So just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Stephen Nutter. I am an advocacy committee member for Livable Streets here in Boston. And we really focus on a bunch of different areas, but mostly just all around transportation and all around trying to make our streets really much more places rather than sort of things to just get you from one place to the other. Boston itself, as you may know, during the early 70s, there was a move to put a bunch of highways through the city of Boston, which is a very old city, and basically most of those fell flat and were actually stopped, except for we have one interstate that goes through the city. And what we have, though, is a bunch of infrastructure that was kind of developed in the 1950s prior to the whole interstate highway system. So I have this presentation called "Overpasses Are So 1950s," and the graphics is not working right there, but that's okay. What you're looking at there is a picture of the McGrath Highway, which runs through Somerville, and which is right outside of Boston, and I will give you a better picture of that. In the 1950s, there was a lot of really enthusiasm about building all this new infrastructure in our cities to revitalize them. And we really celebrated the building of this infrastructure as a way of thinking that this is progress. And in fact, this is a postcard. Hello there from Portland. It's a picture of a highway going through the city. This is now what Harbor Drive looks like today in Portland. So the removal of highways can definitely be possible and also create much better places for people. So why are urban overpasses so bad? Well, let me talk just a little bit about urban overpasses themselves. They really kind of are the last link in a lot of places that really try to connect highways together and get you just flying through the city. But they limit choices for people who drive. They disregard neighborhoods and community. They discourage pedestrian and bicycle activity. They're really expensive to maintain, and they negatively impact economically disadvantaged communities more than anywhere else. There's very few places that have highways and overpasses that are in more wealthy communities, but I am going to show you one today. We seem to keep building and building and building, and so eventually, if you're trying to maintain a system, some things are going to get maintained and some things are not. So Boston is kind of going through this phase right now where we're starting to really seriously look at removing a lot of the bigger infrastructure that we have. Specifically the highways that we built in the 50s, which have kind of reached their end of life, and the overpasses that are part of them. So I'm going to show you 4 projects, 3 of them just briefly, and then the last one I'll focus on McGrath Highway in Somerville. So this is a map of Boston, and sort of in the top third there is downtown Boston, and then everything in the bottom 2/3 is more of the residential neighborhoods. The Casey Overpass is the first one that I'll talk about. So the Casey Overpass is part of an Olmsted-designed greenway through the city. The next one is Sullivan Square, which is up north in part of the city. That overpass is actually already gone away, and what's there is sort of temporary surface streets. And the city is in the middle of going through a process to figure out what that's actually going to be. Then there's the Boker Overpass in sort of the historic area in downtown. And then there's the McCarthy Overpass, which is on the McGrath Highway in Somerville, and that's where I'm really going to focus my presentation today. So the Casey Overpass currently looks like this as an aerial shot. It's an overpass that's choo-choo across a park, actually. And this was built in the 50s and is already about to start construction demolition and then construction of a new boulevard. So they're basically going to get rid of the overpass and just have it a boulevard on the surface. It's surrounded by some plazas and better access to the T station, to the subway stations. This is what it looks like today, and this is running right in the middle through an Olmsted Park, so even Olmsted can't make highways look good. And this is a rendering of what it may look like at the end in, I think, about 5 years. Then there's Sullivan Square, and I love that this is a picture of Sullivan Square around 1895, and it's just, very kind of late 1800s, beautiful kind of, Victorian neighborhood. This is what it looks like today, because the square went away, and this is, they put an overpass through, and this is the temporary streets that they put down around it. To the far right of your screen there, you can see that's Interstate 93, which was put in the 70s, sort of further destroying this area of town as in terms of anything pedestrian. So this is an aerial shot of what it looks like today. And on the far right there is actually the Mystic River, but there's really kind of no way to get there unless you really want to go through this kind of spaghetti of roads. This is what the city is now proposing. So they will make kind of a nice grid of streets. And this design has actually been really contentious in the neighborhood. And it's only taken really just many years and many meetings in order for this to actually happen, because some people in the neighborhood think that once these overpasses and underpasses and all these pieces are put towards more pedestrian activities, then it's going to slow traffic and push traffic into the neighborhoods. But the studies currently say that that's not really going to happen. Then there's the Boca Overpass, which is in Back Bay, if you're familiar with Boston. On the far left there is the original Olmsted design. So it was a way to get water into this very really beautiful kind of landscaped area in the middle of town. And then in the 50s, in the middle of that image there, in the 50s they put in this overpass to kind of shoot you over the park again, really as a way to get commuters into downtown. And Fenway Stadium is on the bottom of that picture, actually. So it's a good way to go see the Red Sox. But the neighborhood is really trying to push this new design on the far right, where we can kind of restore the parklands and create just much better pedestrian activities, but still make it easy enough to get to major events and to the hospital area, which is also to the south of that. And this is what it looks like today. It's just this. It really kind of divides this beautiful neighborhood. So this is a nice aerial shot of Boston, and up in the middle of your screen there, that is downtown Boston, and it's very it's an old part of the city, and there's nothing like a street grid there at all, as you can see. And you can also see that I like this image because you can see that the grain of the city, if you will, is a very sort of fine grained, except for a few areas. On the right-hand side, that's Logan Airport, and just below that, on the water, is what used to be a major rail yard coming in from the south. That rail yard has now gone away, and it's being developed into a nice neighborhood, actually. And then I'm going to talk about the area around McGrath Highway, which is this area here in red. And if you see that area there in red, the grain kind of goes away. That fine grain. That fine grain is really interesting because highways. But that area that's around the McGrath Highway and Interstate 93 to some extent is about 14 million square feet that you really don't want to walk in around at all. It's a half-mile square, so it's this almost like a crater, you know, in the middle of the city. It's 14 million square feet, and at $60 a square foot for just raw land, that's $840 million worth of space that could be turned into some sort of neighborhood. So just to reorient yourself again, the McCarthy Overpass is part of the McGrath Highway, and the McGrath Highway runs north out of the city. And I just want to zoom in here just to kind of show the detail of what highways do to cities. I took the liberty of taking another portion of that of that aerial shot and just pasting it in there to say, well, what if the highway wasn't there and all those that in there. And I thought, well, that just, you know, it looks like it's part of the you know, the rest of the neighborhood, and you know, it even makes Interstate 93, which is sort of on the right-hand side of that, it almost makes that look better. Then I thought, well, what if maybe the neighborhood is not what we need. Maybe we need a big park in the middle of the city. So here's a piece of Franklin Park, which well, then I thought, well, let's go both ways. Let's have a park and let's have a little bit of a neighborhood too. Which again, I just think you would never know that that's a photoshopped piece if no one told you. This is actually interesting because this is a paste in of the map from around the 1895 era, and friendly area, and that big green area there was that's the McLean Insane Asylum Hospital, which is now moved out of town, but at one point they were there, and it was a kind of Victorian concept of a hospital with a big, you know, green park area with these small buildings around it, because fresh air was the best way, and still is, I think, to, you know, as part of a rejuvenation process for yourself. Or there's also, and around in the late 1700s, there was a river that ran through here that took you out to the Charles River and then to the ocean. That river was basically just filled in. There's not much that I know of in terms of culverts and things to deal with the water. Consequently, a lot of this area floods when we get really heavy rains. So I put them all three together, the river, so bring back the river, put in neighborhoods, and have a nice park there, and you start to create this great place to live. And it's interesting because these three lines here that I've highlighted are these historic roadways that really connected the different areas in Boston. Boston, unlike some of the other cities out west, there's no grid system. It's actually a bunch of nodes, neighborhood nodes that you that sort of line of sight to get you from one neighborhood node to the other has now been cut off by various highways and overpasses. So here is an aerial shot from 1938, and you can see kind of a very bustling neighborhood. The black dots there on the white boulevard that ran through that area, those are all cars. On both sides of the boulevard, it's just really nice in terms of very sort of scaled pedestrian environments. And I was going to zoom in there and so you can see that, and that's 1938. And you can see that area there on the right-hand side is the rail yard. So we had a rail yard that served Boston on the north and a rail yard that served Boston on the south. Both of those rail yards have now shut down because we don't move things around that way, around the country that way, as much as we did in that time period. Largely replaced by tractor trailers in the highway system. And then McGrath Highway goes in as sort of sitting on top of that historic boulevard. And so they put in, it's like a 6-lane highway, and it kind of goes up and down, and it's almost like a roller coaster in the middle of the city, because it was before like a lot of highway designs were really sort of codified into best practices. This was just kind of a one-off way of trying to get cars into the city really quickly. And actually, within like 10 years of the highway being put in the middle of Somerville here, Interstate 93 went in and largely replaced the need to even have this highway. So the McGrath Highway actually negatively impacts multiple communities that away from Boston. So in the far bottom right-hand corner of your screen, that is downtown Boston, and then the McGrath Highway runs up on the orange line. The orange line that you see here on the map runs up through there, and that's all basically a highway. So this interesting concept about taking highways and turning them into boulevards. This is Mass Ave and Back Bay, which is not necessarily a boulevard in the proper sense, but it is a major road that runs north and south here in Boston. This carries 38,000 vehicles a day. There's dedicated bus lines, there's dedicated bike lanes, which you can't see on this image right now because this was taken before the bike lanes went in. It has turning lanes, and it's a nice place to live and work, and it's you can see the big group of students, there are kids there on the left-hand side waiting for the bus. It really serves the neighborhood, serves the purposes of everyone around. This is the McCarthy Overpass in Somerville. It also carries 38,000 vehicles a day and is not a place that you would ever want to be in terms of being a pedestrian. Most people don't even like to drive through here. It's so confusing. And this is what it looks like from up above. And so when we're talking about, can we remove this highway? Can it carry the same amount of traffic? I think it's pretty obvious and clear that what we need to do is just always think about these things in terms of that they're not just there for the cars. They're actually there for everything that everyone who uses the roadway or the adjacent areas to the roadway. So this is another image of it, of the existing. And this is what Livable Streets is proposing, which is really kind of taking the same, we have this, when you remove a highway, as you saw in the South Bronx presentation, you get a lot of extra space. So we're hoping to have like dedicated bus lines and dedicated bike lanes and maybe just a couple lanes to get you in and out of the city, and a lot more places for walking and a lot more connections. And one of the ways that we've been able to achieve some of the work that we've done is really getting out there on the street and getting people to sign postcards that we then gave to the Secretary of Transportation. this is a woman who lived on one side of the highway, and there happens to be an elementary school on the other side of the highway, and this is how she took her kids to school in the mornings. So we've done a lot of work to get us to the point that we're at now. So we send letters to our elected officials. We send letters to project managers. We've gone to the board meetings for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. Excuse me. We give public comments. We actually took all of our the elected officials and people within Mass DOT. We took them on a walk of the site. And then we had a community meeting, which about 200 people showed up, and there was just a lot of passion in the room to get rid of this highway. And then we didn't stop there. We just kept going with it. And eventually, by the end of the summer of last year, we had basically drafted a letter that said, you know, here's some things here's our recommendations of what to do next. Mass DOT basically just does not have the capacity at the moment to remove the highway itself, but they are in a repair process with the highway, and we were able to tag on to that repair process to get some really good pedestrian improvements on the ground itself. We have some of our other tools. You know, we have a Facebook page. We brought people out to the site. We have different handouts that we gave people. We spent some time in the farmers markets and set up a booth there. And eventually, after a lot of work, because we were bound together with a few other community groups, we were able to get some preliminary designs on how we can improve the existing ground plane with the money that we have available to repair the highway itself. And so we've gotten some really great work here with getting in formalized bike lanes on the surface on each side of it, and then we also had this is another portion of the overpass. We actually will be a whole new intersection that will get you from one side of the highway to the other. That wasn't there before, and all of the bike lanes and crosswalks and everything that you see there, and even a lot of the curbed lines are not there now. It's just kind of a sea of asphalt with no crossings whatsoever. And so, because of the new bike lanes and the crossings and the visibility ramps and all new signals, and they're moving a couple bus stops around, and really kind of in the middle of the picture there, you see that's the new intersection. So McGrath is kind of hard to explain, but if you're coming down the highway there from the top, that's the northbound, that when you come down there, that will actually be a light. So signalized intersection on a highway starts to take it out of the mind of the community as being a highway, and it starts to take it back to this concept of a neighborhood street or boulevard. So we're going to continue to push to get it to be something that's more of a neighborhood street. The really great win that we've had recently, besides the good pedestrian surface improvements has been Mass DOT had started a grounding study that mostly around the infrastructure portion of it, because it was basically becoming so expensive to maintain. And the final outcome of that study has been that the highway will go away at some point, and actually turn into a grounding a boulevard itself. But we're not sure when that's going to happen. And so there's a lot of projects that are happening in Boston, and everyone's competing for money, of course, and resources and just headspace. So you know, we need to continue to push so that this stays focused in everyone's mind. The thing that came out of that was that the traffic studies, of course, wanted to say that this new surface road needed to be 6 lanes. That's what the traffic study said, which would basically be taking a elevated highway and putting it on the ground, so it doesn't really do anything to help the neighborhood. But Mass DOT has been really good partners in a lot of sense, because they have, in order to remove the highway, they have to take it through an environmental permitting process. And so if an option, a design option doesn't go through that environmental permitting process, then it's just basically never going to be built. So in addition to that 6-lane, basically surface highway concept, they're also going to do a 4-lane surface highway concept through the environmental permitting process. So at least we can continue this conversation that the roadway is really best serves everyone involved if it's more of a city street and not a highway. So that's our progress so far. We've found that that of course removing highways is a multi-year, multi-agency, multi-stakeholder process. But in the end, when it does happen, you can really get neighbors and communities and agencies to rally around just at least some core principles. Things do happen with time. So thank you very much.
Oh, that was great, Stephen. Thank you so much. All right, so if I could ask both Dave and Stephen to turn on your webcams, we're gonna have a few questions. I think we've got about 5, maybe a few more minutes than that left. And so Jennifer Allen, she was asking some good questions that I want to propose to the both of you. And basically, what she's asking is, when do you know when to apply pressure to decision makers, and when to engage them? Prior to kind of your visioning, and then kind of during your visioning. When is it best? When do you know? And maybe Dave, you can go first and kind of speak to your experience, and then we'll have Stephen talk. And sorry, Dave.
Sorry, are we on? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not unmute? Apologies. In the case of the Alliance, our work kind of goes back to before the organizations formalized themselves as an alliance. So there's a kind of like long history of both inside and outside advocacy from the individual member groups. It's hard to say, kind of pick a finite moment of where it started, because it literally it's been a multi-decade effort, and the Alliance has been around for 15 years. But I mean, one thing to note is just that we come out of this existing movement, we come out of an existing constituency, and it was sort of a matter of uniting those constituencies and kind of like adding power and adding value to the work that we had been doing individually in different neighborhoods. And you know, for us, those moments, they sort of present themselves. I don't really know how else to say, you know, campaigns are, you know, we want to be at the table. I mean, that's where we want to be. But if we're treated in poor faith, you know, or if we're shut out, then you need to make noise. And that's sort of how we've done it. And oftentimes you have kind of, you know, more sort of boisterous or radical groups that are more community based, that will play the sort of outside strategy, and then some also from the community or from larger citywide groups that'll play like the inside strategy, and the two groups will coordinate. And in our case, we were sort of both the insiders and the outsiders, and I mean, we kind of accept that as part of what you need to do in order to get things done. You know, the ideas, you know, are very important, and the technical information is very important. But at the end of the day, as many an urban planner, you know, who has tried to improve things will, I think, attest to, there is a political element to all of this that has to be addressed. So it's hard to say exactly. It's hard to pinpoint, you know, or kind of give generic advice about it. But I think you know, both, you should be working on both tracks from the jump.
I think you're exactly right, Dave. I mean, one of the things that we found was that there are really in cities, at least the size of Boston, there are so many projects going on that and the one that you're interested in is maybe not necessarily the one that's in the top of mind of everyone else. And transportation agencies are designed, they're built to build infrastructure, not necessarily to take it away. And so if you have a whole organizations that just their whole track is to build infrastructure and to make really awesome highways, then that's what they're going to sort of always kind of push to as an organizational structure. So it was really helpful to us to not only speak to, you know, the Secretary of Transportation, who we have an awesome Secretary of Transportation here in Massachusetts, but to also, you know, go down to the administrator level and to the project manager level, and to really speak to everyone involved in the agencies, and try to partner with them and help them solve problems and really try to work with them. And so that's kind of the inside track of not just you know, people at the top, but the people who are doing the work on the ground has been really, really, really helpful.
I'll just add to that, you know, just in our campaign as it happened, and this is sort of, you know, a positive byproduct of being around for you know, multiple decades. The lead planner in the city's plan had been an executive director of one of the community-based organizations, and one of the lead NYC DOT people had been the executive director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. So, you know, it's the sort of thing, you stick around long enough, some of your people do actually get into these positions. We did have tense moments with them, you know, as identified, but ultimately we were able to have a dialogue with them that was very productive, and I think they did good work. And our, you know, a lot of the things that, at least on the surface, a lot of the things that we want to see happen, the Jeanette Sadik Khan, you know, the current commissioner of NYC DOT, is sort of, you know, legendary for all the bike paths and pedestrian improvements that she's made. So the time was sort of right as well.
Okay, great. That was awesome. Yeah, I know John Norquist, you know, being a former mayor of Milwaukee, and his experiences, he would say that political will is incredibly important. You kind of need a political champion. It's difficult, I think, for certain organizations to find that, but when you do, you really can become powerful. But of course, oftentimes the ideas start at the bottom, and the grassroots people are really the kind of the drivers of the vision. So, and both of you prove that. I've got another question quickly for Dave from Jim. Oh, sorry, from Jeremy. He wanted to know if the Southern Bronx River Waterfront Alliance, if the recommendations fit with any master planning that exists already. Does your vision exist with any master planning?
You mean a sort of larger, in larger geographic scope? I mean, I think that although it was never conceived this way because it came from the residents and from the community, there probably is, and in fact the city in their recommendations, where they largely agreed with us, did kind of trumpet the fact that there was some symbiosis with Mayor Bloomberg's 2030 Plan YC initiative. So there is definitely some, I think in very broad strokes, you know, there's some principles that you could identify as being in line with one another, coming from very different perspectives, you know, and with different goals, frankly. But yes, I think that, you know, there's definitely room for the city and the people working on the project to make those connections. But no, there's no sort of like citywide or regional plan. I mean, I will say our member organizations, not directly through the Alliance, but in their own work, are also part of the New York Environmental Justice Alliance and the Organization of Waterfront Neighborhoods, two longstanding environmental justice alliances in New York City. And for example, in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, they held a Sandy Regional Assembly where they put forward their own solutions in a coordinated citywide and even regional way to kind of complement and correct the Bloomberg resiliency efforts that came out in the wake of that storm. So that is something that, you know, I mean, sort of community planning and trying to connect with groups in other neighborhoods on community planning initiatives is something that we do work on. Our member groups also work a lot on waste transfer station equity, which the South Bronx is disproportionately burdened with. But I think it tends to be like that. It's more sort of a grassroots percolation, a community planning, and then residents from those communities reaching out to one another, finding each other, and working on campaigns that advance their common good as neighborhoods that disproportionately are saddled with these noxious land uses and highway infrastructure.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave. We only have time for maybe one more question. I'm going to propose it to Stephen first, and just give me one. We have someone who wants to know, what is the most important lesson coming from these campaigns? So, Stephen, what is the most important lesson? Maybe tough question.
That's a really tough question. That's really hard. I think one of the big lessons I think that we learned was the importance of working with other groups and working with not just other groups, but with the community themselves, because you know, our organization and me and probably a lot of people on this call are really probably big transportation geeks, and you know roads are awesome to talk about all the time. But most of the community is not in it like we are. So it was really important for us to connect up to groups that did transportation, but also did other things like, you know, public health and just pedestrian access and universal accessibility and all these different pieces. Because that really kind of gives you the force to really work with political leaders and agencies, and we happen to have some really strong networks, and we started and so in order to get that to work really well, we actually started this process of talking about McGrath Highway. I think it was about 3 years ago. Where before there was any kind of project on the table, so to speak, we got together and just said, you know, what are 5 things that we can agree on in terms of having a vision, not necessarily a specific design, like this needs to be a 4-lane road with a bike lane and all this other stuff. It's just like, what are 5 concepts that we can agree on, and it was really just to try to say, this neighborhood, this city has been cut in half, and we need to reunite it. And however we do that on the specifics is something else. But to try to get that in the top of mind of everyone was really important for us.
Great, thanks. Dave, do you have an important lesson?
Sure. I mean, I think we've sort of, or hopefully have put forward, what we feel is the sort of most important emphasis, which is the engagement of community residents and resident-led solutions. But in addition to that, I would say, I mean, one thing I definitely have thought about a lot in terms of looking at some of the national campaigns, some of the other local campaigns rather across the nation, is just this basic issue, and this is, I think, why it's so hard to offer kind of broad advice, this basic issue of like the dynamics of your neighborhood, your city, and your region. So for example, with the South Bronx, unlike a lot of areas, a lot of American cities, we don't really, our roadway is still very much used by industry. In fact, where other cities have been and regions have been deindustrialized, those land uses have been actually migrating to the South Bronx, and the city has actually targeted the South Bronx, in a very deliberate way with industrial business zones and incentives to be the site of not just land uses, but manufacturing, warehousing, and so on. So for us, we have a different case to make than maybe in another city where a highway was, serving the steel industry, and that industry is no longer there, and the obsolescence of the roadway is maybe more intuitive, and it's more about building better mass transit options for commuters. So I think that's sort of one, just as in housing, we often talk about the dynamics between upmarket and downmarket, so-called upmarket, so-called downmarket cities. I think that's sort of like a kind of baseline, or maybe a category from which to start thinking about in your city, in your neighborhood, in your region, what are those flows, and how and look for cities and campaigns where there's similarity in the kind of dynamics and challenges that you might face. And I would just say on that, there was a question, I think, from Scott, just about how large business interests in our area, and we do have very powerful large business interests at the Food Distribution Center, have felt about these ideas. I mean, part of our work, in addition to community organizing, has really been over the last year strengthening relationships with those industrial businesses, because they really, they when they heard that we wanted to remove the Sheridan Expressway, the produce market in particular, which is, services 70% of all produce in the New York metro region, they were like, well, if you do that, we're going to, if this roadway is removed, we'll go to New Jersey. They sort of added it onto a long list of things that were deal breakers in their lease negotiations with the city. And, so we had kind of not friendly relationships with those folks for a while, at least in the press. I mean, not personally, but over the past year, we've really reached out more to first our allies in the business community, and then, for example, the produce market. We have been attending Chamber of Commerce meetings and crashing tent parties, and really making an effort to explain how the current phase of the campaign actually improves the transportation network, and the city plan is really a moment where we all share, or should share, broad consensus. And I'm really pleased to report that we're circulating a support letter addressed to the governor and to the New York State DOT, and it has the signature of many of the main operators in Hunts Point, including the produce market. So we actually, in about a year's time, we went from open opposition and hostility in the press to a point of finding the common ground and finding a way to articulate it, and try and move that message, up to Albany. So I think that's, I just want to say that that's possible, even when you come from a very grassroots, perspective of putting neighborhood residents' health as kind of the most important thing. There is, if you can find that common ground, and move as a united front, you get more done. And I think that's ultimately what's going to move us from the recommendations to the implementation phase.
Great, Dave. That was wonderful, wonderful advice. So unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank Stephen Nutter from Livable Streets, and Dave Powell from the Southern Bronx River Watershed Alliance for joining us on our first of a 10-part series on highways to boulevards. Our second webinar is scheduled for November 15th. It is titled Freeway Removal, Community Engagement Strategies for Advocates. So just watch out on CNU.org. And get acquainted with other initiatives around the country and around the world. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, John, for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you all again. Thanks.
Thank you.